Hello, this is Chris Pratt from Eurogamer, and at the moment I'm visiting the Riot headquarters in Los Angeles, which is like no game studio I've ever been to before, and we'll have more to say about that next week, as well as actually just a whole bunch of stuff from this trip. However, yesterday I found myself in something of a unique position. Whilst I was at the HQ, the new champion, Jhin, was revealed publicly, and that meant I got to meet up with August Browning, the champion's creator, and talk to him about what it's like to reveal a new champion to that many League players. And yeah, we kind of talked through the whole process actually. How do you design a new champion for League of Legends? What is day one in that process? And I think that's where we'll begin the interview. So yeah, hope you enjoy it. It's really interesting, and yeah, August is just infectiously excited about what he does, and yeah, I'll let him take it away.
So creating a new character is always very exciting. And honestly, depending on the designer, it starts in a lot of different ways. Myself, I like starting with a thematic, a character idea, kind of the idea of how do I want this character to feel? And that's very important to me. So for Jhin, for example, we kind of started with this picture of this cowboy sniper kind of guy. He was very mysterious. He had a hat that shrouded his vision. I mean, not his vision, but his face from everybody else, and kind of like a cloak that like you didn't really know what was under it. And he had this giant gun on his back, just this long rifle. And that's where we started with Jhin, kind of this idea of like, okay, we have a cowboy sniper. What does that mean to be a cowboy sniper? And for me, what I ask is, what does that feel like in gameplay? And so I kind of like looked at like other games that we have sniper rifles in, like Team Fortress 2, Call of Duty, Halo, stuff like that, and kind of like tried to think about like, what does a sniper do in those games? What does it feel like to be a sniper in those games? And I kind of settled on, for Jhin, a few things. One is, a sniper is about accuracy. You're very concerned with where you're aiming and where you're shooting. And so when I made Jhin, I wanted to make sure that he had a couple spells on his kit that involved skill shots, which is like aiming and shooting something that can miss. I think the missing is very important. We have a character, Caitlyn, in our game, and she is a sniper to some degree, and her ultimate is very long range and shoots a guy perfectly, which feels snipey, but it doesn't have the same, oh, but I could miss this. And so I think missing is very, very important. And then thinking about it more, another thing about sniper rifles in games is that they're slow, they're meticulous, they're planned. When you're playing a sniper in a game, every shot counts. Every single time you pull the trigger, it matters so much, right? And so for Jhin, going back to it, I'd say, well, I want him to feel like he's someone where everything he does matters. Every shot counts, and he's planning, he's thinking, what am I gonna do? Where am I gonna be? Where am I gonna set up? And how am I gonna approach this fight? And so that's where Jin's passive came from. His passive is he has a special gun that only has 4 bullets in the chamber, and then he has to reload it afterwards. And his gun shoots very slowly, whereas most marksmen in the game, they can buy attack speed and speed up their attack speed very, very fast. But Jhin, he has only 4 slow auto attacks every single time. And so going on that thing of like every shot counts, every moment matters. And this is also exciting, not just from oh, this will feel really interesting to play as and feel like a sniper, but also from a gameplay standpoint of, we haven't really done a marksman like that. I started on Jhin before the Graves rework came out, where Graves had ammo, and Graves having ammo actually came from some conversations I had with Certainly T about like ammo systems and like, oh, we can do marksmen who don't just auto attack super fast. And so it was exciting from a new gameplay standpoint of like, this is just a different way to play a marksman, to be a marksman in that way. And so that was really exciting. And so that's like kind of where we started. We had this concept of this robot, cowboy, sniper rifle, mysterious dude, and this idea from a gameplay standpoint of, let's make him about accuracy, and every shot counts. Every shot has to count. Everything really just matters there. And then what tends to happen is when you get started on things, like people play into each other. It's not just a designer that works on a character. I make the kit, which is like the spells and abilities that go in the game, but I also have an artist who will draw concepts of the character and make them look better and make them look more like the correct character. And you have a writer who will help us determine theme and what this character's story is and what he thinks like and what he wants to do and what his motivations are, how he feels. And so those all run into each other. So for example, for Jhin, I was like, okay, we have this 4-shot passive, right? He only gets 4 shots. Well, wouldn't it be cool if the 4th shot was really special? and it does more damage and it crits. And what that does is it creates this tension of you're like 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're trying to build up to that shot number 4, and it feels really good to get there, even though you have to reload afterwards and take a break from the fight. That 4th shot's gonna be very powerful. And so I had that, and I mentioned it to my writer, and I was like, but what kind of sniper only makes the 4th shot powerful? That's kind of dumb, right? All the shots should be powerful. Why would you just have the 4th one? And we kind of thought, well, maybe he's not just a normal guy. Maybe he's got some kind of like OCD, some nervous tics, some weirdness to him where he wants to make kills perfect. Perfect, beautiful, perfect kills. And in order to make the kill perfect, he doesn't want to kill you with the 1st shot or the 2nd one. No, those are warning shots. Those are setting things up. Those are making you dance. And then the 4th shot is the finale. And that's what he's really excited about. And so that's like kind of like, again, when we're talking about champion creation, it's like that's where some of Jhin's themes started coming from, where it was like, well, wait, we have this gameplay mechanic, which is the 4th shot is powerful. Well, what does that mean for the character? What does that mean for his theme? Oh, well, he's kind of psychotic, and he's kind of OCD about this, and he wants things to be perfect and beautiful, and there's setup. And then it goes to that setup and planning game that I was talking about. And so that was very, very cool. And then from there, the writer, Odin, he said, well, what if Jhin, this character, was also just obsessed with the number 4? Like that, what if that was just a nervous tick of the guy, as he just really was interested in number 4, which a cool thing about the number 4 is that Jhin is a killer, he's a serial killer, and number 4 is the number of death in a lot of countries. And so this number actually has some significant meaning to it. And so we were like, okay, well, if he's associated with number 4 and he really likes that number, I can add that to the kit. So he already had the 4-hit passive, but then it's like, what if his ultimate has 4 shots? What if his W reveals you for 4 seconds? What if his Q bounces to 4 targets, right? And so we distribute that through the kit, and it's this back and forth where every time a writer or a concept artist comes up with something really interesting or compelling, I kind of want to put that in my kits if I can fit it in. Another example is in Jinx, when I was working on Jinx, the loose cannon, girl with blue hair and a giant rocket launcher and a minigun and some grenades that she throws. We made this beautiful music video of Jinx that shows her playing with all her weapons. And one of the weapons she has is a fire grenade that she throws out, and it latches onto someone and explodes in a big explosion of fire. And that was in the video, and it looked so cool, like just so freaking awesome. But her grenades in the game, what I had them doing is they would just sit on the ground, and then if someone stepped on them, they'd like put a pool of fire on the ground that kind of looked lame. And I was just like, but in the video they look so good. What if they exploded and it was just an explosion of fire when someone stepped on them? And they get snared too, and they get rooted in place. I kept the gameplay mechanic I needed, but I got rid of that pool of fire because that wasn't exciting as what the video had. And I put in an explosion, which to me like just fit her a lot more. But that was the people working on Jinx outside of gameplay thinking of something really great and interesting, and then me in part of gameplay being like, oh, well, can I capture that in the game somehow? Can I make that more interesting? And so for me, that's how I personally do designs, is I start with thinking, how do I want the character to feel? What do I want them to be like? And I get some basic skills and abilities. But then I also work with the artists and the writers, and we say, well, who is this character? And I'll give them ideas from abilities that I've made, and then they'll give me ideas to refine the abilities from themes and concepts and art that they make. And it's this self-reinforcing process that at the end of the day makes, I think, very thematically cohesive characters, which to me is like really exciting and something a lot of players really love. So eventually we release the character, right? And that tends to be a more final day. It's not a final day because after a character comes out, we can still write stories about them. We can still edit their balance. We can still change their kits. And sometimes, heck, we even rework whole characters, right? So it's never truly final. But the important thing about a release is that that's the character that players are probably going to become to know and love. And so in the future, if we make any changes, we have to be really careful because you're changing something that people know and love and feel attached to. Whereas if you change something before release, no one cares because it's just the 10 people working on it, right? And so that's what's really important, is that you need to make sure that when you release a champion that you're releasing like basically the right things about them, because people are going to get attached to those things, and you're going to have to be able to like really make sure that you don't want to like delete those things later, because if you do, there's a cost to that. Mm-hmm. There's a cost to that, and you have to be willing to pay that cost. And sometimes it's worth that cost. Sometimes we make characters better having paid that cost. I would give the Poppy rework as an example recently, where it's like Poppy is just a much more compelling and exciting character, both from thematics, lore, and gameplay. So I think she was a success. But at the end of the day, I will say there are some Poppy players out there who probably aren't happy because they liked her old crazy ultimate that made her invulnerable and her old passive that tricked you into thinking you could ever kill her. And so there's always a cost there. There's always a cost to change. And so we really do just want to make sure that the character we release is exciting and unique and fun and just something that players will love, and then make sure that the ways that they love that character are things that are sustainable and we're actually okay with supporting in the game. During PBE, we can and should make changes, honestly. Obviously, we can't do things that are sweeping in nature because a lot of changes just can't be made because we don't have the resources. We've already made most of the art. We've already made most of the sounds, right? But at the same time, a PBE before release is a great time to do things that impact feel, right? When you ship a character, say, a character might have a 1 second cast time on their spell, right? That's going to become something that players get intimately familiar with, both playing as and against. They're going to learn exactly how long they have to dodge it and exactly how long it takes to fire, and they're going to learn, and because of that, they'll start learning and like memorizing situations where those spells are good or bad. And so if you change a cast time after release, it's not that you can't do it, but it's really scary to do that because it completely changes when and where and what situations the spell is good and bad in and how dodgeable it is. And so stuff like that that's like really, really impacting to the feel of a champion, we've got to be really careful about changing in the future. And again, that's not that we shouldn't do it. It's just it's that's a lot harder to change later. Whereas like stuff like numbers, where it's like this character has 10 more health, or this character does 50 less damage on the ultimate. That's a lot easier to change because it doesn't change how the ability functions. It just changes how powerful or less powerful it is. So what we try to do with the new champion release is nowadays we try to identify where we think there might be problems, right? So for Jhin, a concern I have is I actually think that Jhin is winning as long as one other person who can do damage on his team is winning. It doesn't matter how well Jhin is doing because of his extreme ranges and crowd control. The extreme range of his crowd control and damage on his W and his R. If you have an Aurelia who's fed, Jhin could be 0-10, he's still useful, he's still incredibly powerful because he can catch people for that Aurelia, lock him down, and then she'll kill him for him. And so my worry is it possible to truly get Jhin behind as long as he has a team that's doing well? Because compared to, say, Vayne, if you get a Vayne behind, that's a big deal. Even if Vayne's team is doing well, they're down basically a character until she catches up. With Jhin, though, I would argue that that's a lot less true. It's a lot harder to get him out of the game. And so we kind of identify problems like that, and we say, well, how do we solve that if that actually is true? Because the thing we like to say is that like the first day of a champion's release, we get millions of more playtests than we'd ever got throughout the entire development process. That's how many players we have. And so we can never be for sure exactly what a champion's going to do or exactly where they're going to express their power. And so again, worry, Jhin may be hard to get out of the game, he may be hard to get behind, and then we developed solutions in case that is true. And so for me it says, okay, well, if Jhin is hard to make fall behind, perhaps that means that I should increase the cooldowns of his long-range spells, his W and his R. Because if the cooldowns are higher, and maybe they scaled down with level, that means if you get him behind in levels, he's not going to be as effective because he can't cast his spells as much. But a Jhin who's doing well will catch up in levels, his spells will catch up, and it'll all even out. And so it's things like that, where basically you identify a problem, a potential problem, and you say, what is a possible solution that could address this problem? And we do that for characters pretty consistently nowadays. So yeah, the character's been officially revealed today. Looking at the feedback, I'd say that I'm not honestly that surprised with much of it. I kind of saw a lot of it coming. There's a lot of positive feedback, a lot of people who are really excited. He's got a lot of really cool spells on his kit, like the ultimate, the passive. A lot of this stuff is going to be a lot of fun to play. And there's also some people who are kind of disappointed, honestly. And that's a reasonable response to have. Some of the things that people are saying is that he's not artistic enough. So looking at the teaser, Jhin creates all these beautiful deaths, right? But in our reveal, we don't really have anything to support that. And part of that is, I think the reveal really sells just one aspect of the character, where it's just like, Jhin is not just about beautiful deaths. Jhin is a much more complex person than that. He's a psychopath, he has a gun, and he's very accurate with that gun. Part of his fantasy is just kind of a gunslinger, he's just shooting you with that thing. Part of his fantasy is being a sniper. Part of his fantasy is just being like kind of like an eclectic psychopath who's like trying to count to 4 all the time. And so there's a lot of other aspects of his character that are important. Now that said, we did sell these death effects with the teaser, and we think that it's important that that's part of his character as well. And so we actually do have a mechanic that's going in that is going to be a death effect, where when he kills someone, they spawn a flower on their corpse that blooms and then explodes in a beautiful way. And regretfully, we just couldn't get that in time for the teaser, and that's my bad. I didn't lock it down in time. I was kind of like jumbling around in my head, like, what is the perfect mechanic for Jhin having a death effect? We always knew that he should have a death effect. I just never, from a design perspective, got like the right thing until a couple weeks ago, and by then it was too late to localize for the reveal. And so not too worried about that. And then the other comment that I think is interesting, we actually see this on a lot of champions, is players will read the tooltips on the spells and say, GG, Riot, all those spells are the same as all these other spells over here. Not a very new or interesting character, look at that. And to me that's kind of like, I don't know, to me that's kind of like doing a disservice to a character, because I would say that it is not important that a character have any one spell that you've never seen before. A character can have a targeted skill shot, a character can have a basic attack, a character can have a trap they put on the ground. Those are, I think, fine for a character to have. The important thing, the really, really important thing, is that when those spells come together, the character feels new and unique and different. And I'm confident that Jhin is very different, like very, very different, just because of the ranges of his spells and his auto-attacking cadence. People have never played a guy like this before, I guarantee it. At least in League of Legends, to this degree. It reminds me of when we revealed Lux many years ago. Lux is this late mage character, and we had another character in the game, Morgana, who's this dark angel. And they both have a skill shot that roots people, a shield, and a damage, a zone they put on the ground that deals damage to you. And when Lux was revealed, everybody was like, well, GG, Riot, that's just a Morgana clone. What the heck's going on here? But then when you see Lux, when Lux came out, like, no one was upset about it because she's actually very, very different. She has much different combat ranges that make her combat pattern like completely different than Morgana's, and she has a completely different ultimate, which is just a giant like death laser from across the map. And so at the end of the day, even though the characters looked similar on paper, they're actually very, very different. And I'm confident that it's similar with Jhin, where it's like, this guy has some similar spells. His W is a very, very long range Jinx Zap, and his Q is Katarina's Bouncing Blade in some respects. But at the same time, they also have different nuances to them, and they combine with the rest of a character's kit to make a whole package that plays very differently and has a lot of interest to it, in my opinion.
Is it any different designing your 5th champion for League of Legends than your first? Like, has that process changed much?
Yes, actually. So there's a lot of things that have changed. First of all, like, I'm just better at design. Like, I remember when I was working on Vi, I was very unconfident and kind of like just confused as to what I should do. So I wouldn't have any structure to what I was doing. I'd basically just kind of like result to my guts of like, she should punch people really hard. Okay, how do I punch people? Graves collateral damage, put that on her E, and that's her, yeah, she punches you and it does a cone. Cool ability. And then like, I was basically just trying abilities until I found ones that worked, and I was like, okay, great, made a character. And then near the end, I started like tuning her with like better design principles of like, well, characters should be special. So what does she do that it's special? That's her ultimate. And characters should have something powerful about them, even if they're weak and stuff like that. But at the start of Vi, I think I was really lucky because I kind of like took a picture of her around to people and said like, what does she do? And they were like, Falcon Punch. And I was like, okay, I'll make Falcon Punch. And her Q, that's Falcon Punch, Volt Breaker. And it was a very successful ability from day one. So I think I was kind of lucky in that even from day one, I had one spell on the kit that I could build the rest of the kit around. Because honestly, I was kind of like, back then, I didn't know as much of what I was doing about like, well, what does it mean to build a kit that supports an ability? What are the goals of that kit? And nowadays, one of the easier things is like, I find it really, really easy to get confidence if an ability I have in a kit is good or bad after just a couple play tests and a couple iterations. Because as a designer, I've learned how to set goals and set desires for what I want the character to do. And so with Jhin, for example, his Q is a very simple spell, which is just he shoots it at a target and it bounces 4 times and it amps damage if it kills anything. And it's a very simple spell, and old me, back when I was working on Vi, would have said, well, that spell's too simple and boring, and like, I don't want that for this. Let's make something cooler and more interesting. But new me is like, well, actually, no, this is supposed to be simple for these reasons. Jhin is very, very focused on basic attacking, so I don't actually want to create something too complex and high APM because he always has to worry about positioning and basic attacking. And Jhin has a reloading mechanic, so I need a very simple targeted spell for him to use while he's reloading so he has something to do during his downtime. And Jin's basic attacks are very slow, so he doesn't really attack very fast. He can't really wave control very well, minions. But his Q is AoE, so this is how he wave controls. And so I basically had a lot of goals for what the Q needed to achieve, and so I can reference those goals, what the Q is actually doing. And with that, I was able to gain a lot of confidence, and like I can extend that to his other spells. And the other thing that's different, honestly, is just like kind of like the process we take around making champions. Where back when I was making Vi, like we shipped a champion every 3 weeks, and so kind of like how you made a champion was just like, here's some art, go make that. Okay, where are you? Okay, we're shipping, we're going into production in a week. You're gonna have to have those abilities locked down by then. Like, we actually just had to ship things really fast and like get stuff done really fast. And so like we sometimes just had to lock spells that maybe weren't the best because it's just like, well, we gotta make the character now. So there's a lot of pressure to like find stuff really quickly. And sometimes that gave us great characters like Vayne, and sometimes that gave us terrible characters like Yorick. And so nowadays we have a lot more time. And then additionally, we did ideation back then a lot differently. How it used to be is characters would get approved before they even had a kit. So you'd have Vi, the Piltover Enforcer, and that's a whole character right there. And she'd get approved, and then we'd say, okay, well, let's make a kit for Vi, the Piltover Enforcer. What does this look like? What does it do? And for me, I actually really like that, because like that's kind of my design style again, is I like starting out with a concept and saying, how do this character feel? And like having like a picture of Vi in front of me is like very easy to be like, oh, she feels like that, right? But nowadays, we start from a lot of different other angles, and we like kind of like all work in tandem. So it's like we like kind of like start out and saying like, for Jhin, the first thing we wanted for Jhin was honestly not Jhin. It was we need a marksman. We want to ship a marksman at the start of next year. So let's think about making a marksman, and that's where it started. And then we were like, well, what different types of marksmen could we could make? And we had an idea of like, maybe there could be a geomancer where she actually like throws rocks, and like that's an AD marksman for you. And then we had like this robot cowboy Jhin idea. And then we had idea of like this Yordle bounty hunter. And like there's just a lot of different marksman ideas that we came up with. And like, so nowadays, like we're constantly honing in on concepts. We're basically like making lots of ideas, generating a lot of ideas, and then like trying to like set goals for our slots and say, well, like what best fulfills these goals, and like narrow down and like work a lot more in tandem. So whereas it used to be, it's just like, well, Vi's art is pretty much done, so make a kit that's the perfect Vi kit. Nowadays, it's like, well, we know we're making this robot bounty hunter sniper kind of guy. So what kind of kit does it look like on that guy? Okay, here's some of the ideas for the kit. So what kind of character might work with that kit? Oh, here's some ideas for that character. Okay, well, what kind of art might work for that character? And then we just get this reinforcement cycle of like basically building a character from art, theme, and lore from the ground up and gameplay, as opposed to like starting just purely like, this is the character, go make that one.
So how long was the design process for Jhin?
Jhin is relatively fast, actually, compared to a lot of other champions. The actual, like, from ideation phase to finish was about 7 months. So Jhin was actually pretty fast. The fastest champion I've ever worked on is Vi. She was 6 months for me personally, but she had probably about a month or two of ideation before I started at the company. She'd already been approved when I started, and like my first day, I was just like, oh, I want her. She looks great. But other champions can take a long time. I'd say Jhin is actually very like below the average of time that it takes for champions. Probably the average champion takes about a year to make, and some champions can take even longer. I know I was working on Jinx like on and off for like almost a year and a half, and Gnar, another character I worked on, he was like almost a year and a half as well, maybe even 2, because in middle of his production, he had to switch designers because one of the designers couldn't work on him anymore. And so yeah, it just depends on the character. Like some characters are very, very fast. Fastest being around nowadays, probably about 6 months is like the breakneck speed. And other characters, they just take a lot of time to like get right and figure out exactly what they are and how they work.
And one final question for Jhin. Were there any ideas that you kind of tried to work into it and then decided against? Like, was there anything that you thought about and it just never quite worked out, or you came up with something better? Like,
so here's the thing. Here's like probably the biggest change in Jhin. Jhin didn't used to be Jhin. Jhin used to be being worked on by another designer, Rex, Jordan Anton, and his original concept ended up turning into Kindred. Jhin used to be Kindred. What happened is we had this robot bounty hunter sniper, and Jordan was like, oh, well, bounty hunting, that's interesting. What does bounty hunting mean? And he kind of like designed this 80 carry jungler who collects bounties. That's Kindred's passive, if you know. Except now Kindred's theme is death, right? It's like they reap souls. But originally it was collecting bounties. And as Jordan made this kit for this robot bounty hunter character who would eventually become Jhin, he was like, okay, collecting bounties, and like made this bounty hunter character. And then he kind of realized like halfway through, well, maybe Jhin wasn't the best character to do this with. And so as they ideated, they kind of like strayed away from this robot sniper character and strayed more towards, well, what if it was like a Yordle who had a dragon pet and you grew the dragon? Or what if it was like a hillbilly who had this like pet dog that he really liked, and you got kills and fed them to the dog, and eventually it was just like, well, what if it was Death? And Death is walking around reaping souls, and that's where Kindred ended up coming out. And so then, a few months later, we start working on our next marksman, and we were like, well, but what about that guy that used to be Kindred? He's still pretty cool, the robot bounty hunter. And obviously we couldn't do bounty hunter anymore, so we had to adjust this theme, but we just started back on like, well, there's still something really interesting about this mysterious sniper that we have here. Well, let's see if we can flesh him out and make him interesting. And so he came back and he ended up becoming a character. And that's like actually a really cool thing in ideation, is like in ideation, a lot of characters we make, like they start out and we'll throw them aside. We'll say like, well, this isn't working for this reason. It's not meeting this goal. But that doesn't mean they're dead. Really, really interesting characters always like tend to come back in ideation repeatedly until we really figure out why they were why they're not working, or we figure out, oh, actually, this is how it could work. And that's what happened with Jhin. Is he used to be Kindred, didn't work out for Kindred, and now he's Jhin, the virtuoso. Let's see, anything else that like happened with him that was really, really different? His passive used to do a lot more damage. I remember I was always making him with the assumption of, well, he attacks really, really, really slow, but he does tons of damage. Like every single auto attack does just tons of damage. And so he used to attack even slower than he does now. He used to not scale at all with game time. Now he actually gets a little bit of attack speed every level, but he used to not scale at all with game time, but he used to do way more damage. I remember one playtest where I actually was like, nope, this doesn't work, we gotta change it, he was fighting a Zed, and the Zed was like, had flanked him and was coming to like kill him and be like, and the Zed's like, I'm a badass, I got this. The Zed was at full health. Jin's on his fourth shot, turns around, one-shots him. Just one bullet, full to zero, gone. And I was just like, it's not good gameplay, can't do that. And that like contributed to him eventually, like his overall damage on each attack has gone down, but he has been able to attack a bit faster, and he gets like things like movement speed, and he can crit and stuff like that. Whereas it used to just be like every attack just does 5 billion damage. And so that changed. And then yeah, I think the only other thing really for Jhin that like was a massive change was he used to just have like a lot of different kits for his Q, W, and E. He always had a version of his R. His R was always just channel and shoot lots of bullets a lot, because what I wanted for Jin's R was that feeling. Have you ever played in an FPS and the sniper shoots at you and you hear it, or like in Halo you see it whiz by and there's like white trail, and you're like, oh god, I can't, and then you have to like go hide behind cover. That's what I wanted that feeling of for Jhin. It wasn't just the one shot and then it's over. It's like he is actively pinning you down. And so his ultimate always got that feeling for me, which is why I kept iterating on it. But he used to have a lot of other stuff on his kit where it's like his E was like a bouncing bullet where he'd shoot it at someone and then it would like embed in them, and then he could like re-aim it and shoot it out of them, and then they would like shoot over to some other person. And he used to have like these mark systems where like he would like put traps on people, and then the traps would be like, you're revealed and spotted out, and then his whole team would get like a Sivir ult towards that guy to like kill that guy. And his W used to just be like Nidalee Spear. Like he'd just like a 2500 range Nidalee Spear that would just like one-shot you. That wasn't okay. A lot of the reasons the W is like different now is because we wanted to like tone down its poking potential, because that felt really abusive, but we still wanted to give like a cool like strategic viability, which is like this catching out, and so like he could snare you with it. And the reason it has this spotting mechanic on it where your allies have to hit them first for it to snare people at long ranges is kind of the idea of like, well, is a 2500 range really okay? A 2500 range snare really okay to put in the game? Maybe not. Well, how can we limit that? How can we make that more fair? And the idea was, well, if you require an ally to be on them first, that's a lot more fair, a lot more interesting. And then his Q is always just like a pretty simple spell.
Actually, one final thing just to wrap up the gist of what does the next few weeks look like for you in terms of this character? Like what you're going to be working on and looking at, I guess.
So the big thing before release is bug fixing. You never kind of like really, before you work in the game industry, you never really realize like how big of a deal bugs are. But they're a big deal, and there are a lot of them. Wow, like so many bugs, and it's not because we're doing bad work, it's because it just happens. And so bug fixing is always important. We want to make the character feel as smooth and usable and like weird and buggy as we can. So those are always important for most champions. Some are more buggy than others. And then aside from that, balancing is another thing we are considering these last few weeks. We've balanced him a lot before hitting PBE, but there's still like another week of player feedback and then just internal feedback to get like, basically our goal for balance on characters nowadays is that like we want characters to release in a reasonable spot, such that like if you play them, you can see a path to success and you can succeed on them and do well. It's actually really suboptimal for us to like release a character who like comes out at 36% win rate and goes up to 40% win rate and just sits there. Like we don't want to release bad characters. We don't think that's actually like really fun to play, and honestly like to play against, it's like not as exciting to just play against a really trash character. You want to if a character is well tuned on release, one thing that's good about playing against them is you'll actually see why they're powerful. You'll learn why they're powerful, and even if it could be frustrating or whatnot, you'll be able to. Players will be like, oh, this is what I have to watch out for. Whereas a poorly tuned character, either too strong or too weak, won't be expressing their power in the right way. So, like for example, imagine Vi comes out and she just has 5 million base damages, but no scaling, right? And that's an incorrect tuning. What would happen is she might build straight tank, and so the Vi people end up playing against is like this invincible juggernaut that kind of like runs at your carry, and there's nothing you can do, and you just die, right? And like your experience from that is like, well, Vi is just invincible, and I don't really know how to play against her. Whereas like a Vi who has to build more damage items to do more damage says like, well, Vi is actually squishy, and so like you can try to like play around like how squishy she is, and a Vi player has to like know that they're putting themselves in danger. And then on the flip side, it's like the character comes out too weak, and like all the Vi players will be like, well, I don't really ever want to ult because I don't really do anything when I ult. I just kind of die. And so like you don't actually get to see like what's really truly strong about her, which is every 150 seconds your AD carry gets stunned and then she beats the crap out of them. And so it's a spectrum where like we want characters to release at a decent state of balance, which is like basically between slightly weak and slightly strong with a preference for slightly strong. But we do actively want to avoid way too strong and way too weak, because we would think that creates, in both situations, the wrong expectations and the wrong learnings for what that character is and can do. And then aside from balance, like talking to players, we really do try to like communicate with players here at Riot. Like I actually really enjoy it. It's very energizing and fun, and just like really engaging with people and like getting them excited about characters and like getting their feedback too, and being like, oh, here's something that doesn't excite you. Well, maybe I can do something about it, maybe I can't. But like kind of understanding player sentiments. So yeah, balance tuning, talking to people, and then also just like planning for like what's going to happen after release. Like kind of as we mentioned earlier, like if this is too strong, we'll do this. If this is too weak, we'll do that. Figuring out a reaction plan. And then we wait, and then we watch, and hopefully he's great. I think he's going to be great. I hope so. Should be fun.
それで始まりました。でこうやってガーッと歩いていって、なんかまあ何か出てきたら避けるでしょうってこうでなんかハテナってついてるので叩くだろうねって言って叩くとコインって言って嬉しいので次のハテナをコインって叩くと出てくる。いやーって逃げようと思ったら当たってしまうと。で当たってしまったつもりが大きくなったっていうのでここでものすごく